arc of crisis now stretches across the entire globe, and that is the first thing we can agree on. The second one is about the role of the United States, Europe's main ally. It is turning its attention away from our continent in a lasting and structural way. Americans have never felt less Europeans, and it can be the first steps of a Europe with a bit less or a lot less America. At the same time, the presence of North Korean soldiers in Europe marks a first for East Asian soldiers since the Mongol invasion 7 centuries ago. And it shows how interconnected things are today. This is why Europeans must therefore rely more on themselves, including to keep Washington engaged in their defense. Autonomy is a condition for cooperation, and we need to move beyond the phase of paralysis, beyond the phase of declarations, to the phase of real implementation. A great deal has already been done, with a stated objective of 3.5% of GDP devoted to defense, and with the mobilization of European instruments like SAFE to deliver concrete responses. But clearly, Europe will not defend itself with only acronyms nor money alone. It needs material capabilities, the ability to use them in a coordinated way, and a shared political will to act. In this regard, regional formats have emerged as a practical forerunners for what could be achieved within NATO and within the EU. And I think in the EU, at least, it's a very common thing. Think of the Euro, think of Schengen. These were cooperation started outside of the treaties that became main EU policies at some point. And it seems that the Coalition des Volontaires is a good illustration of that. In short, beyond material capabilities, what Europe needs is shared analysis, it's common strategies for action and concrete cooperation. We are very lucky today to welcome 5 defense policy directors to have this discussion of 5 important countries in Europe. Guillaume Molanier, you are the Directeur Général pour les relations internationales et stratégiques at the French Ministry of Armed Forces. Paul Wyatt, you are the DPD at the British Ministry of Defense. Marcin Kazmierski, you are the DPD at the Polish Ministry of Defense. Paolo Sandri for Italy, and Tobias Elling-Refeld for the Kingdom of Denmark. I will start with all of you with one question. How do you see the political operationalization of the next step if you think of this minilateralism or way to go forward, not outside of the treaties, but within the treaties in small coalitions of the willing? And I give you the floor, Mr. Olanier.
Thank you very much, dear Philippe. I understand that I can speak French and that everybody is equipped to get the translation. Is that right? If it is, I move to French because it's my language.
Your country.
And my country. The privilege to be at home, you know. Merci beaucoup, Philippe. Et avant de répondre à cette question, je veux dire que c'est non seulement un grand honneur d'être ici ce matin devant vous, mais par ailleurs un véritable plaisir d'être sur cette scène avec des amis très proches avec lesquels les conversations, les interactions sont permanentes et continues. Et c'est un peu étonnant pour nous, je ne sais plus avec lequel d'entre vous je le disais, pour la première fois d'avoir une réunion entre nous devant un certain nombre de personnes. D'habitude, c'est un petit peu plus restreint. Je pense que la nature des discussions sera la même, mais en tout cas, merci beaucoup à Paul, à Marcin, à Paolo et à Tobias d'être ici sur ce sujet important ce matin. Pour répondre à la question, je pense que dans le contexte que Philippe a décrit, si on regarde ce que nous avons à faire en Europe, il y a en gros, pour moi, trois grands domaines, 3 grands chantiers. Le premier, c'est l'OTAN, évidemment, qui est au cœur de notre sécurité collective en Europe. S'agissant de l'OTAN, la ligne est claire, la direction est connue. Les États-Unis d'Amérique eux-mêmes nous demandent d'aller vers a more European-led NATO. Et donc, c'est ce que nous avons à faire, en ne perdant pas de vue l'immensité du chantier que représente cette ambition. Il ne s'agit pas que d'une question de capacité militaire, il ne s'agit pas simplement d'une question d'augmentation des budgets de défense, il ne s'agit pas simplement de réfléchir à la façon de remplacer une pour une les capacités militaires critiques américaines qui pourraient être envoyées vers d'autres théâtres. Il s'agit aussi, et peut-être davantage encore, de repenser la façon de préserver la crédibilité de l'OTAN, y compris avec les États-Unis assumant publiquement, et c'est légitime, avoir d'autres priorités et souhaiter que les Européens prennent le leading role au sein de l'OTAN. Et je pense que du point de vue de la France, l'un des objectifs majeurs du sommet d'Ankara cet été, de l'OTAN, sommet de l'OTAN d'Ankara, sera de trouver le moyen de faire comprendre à nos partenaires, mais aussi à nos adversaires potentiels, que même avec des États-Unis moins investis, parce qu'ils ont d'autres priorités, l'OTAN demeure l'alliance la plus puissante au monde et reste crédible pour dissuader tous ses adversaires d'attenter aux intérêts de sécurité de l'Europe. Le deuxième grand chantier, évidemment, c'est l'Union européenne. Alors à la fin, on est bien d'accord, en tout cas c'est la vision française, à la fin, la sécurité de l'Europe, elle repose sur la capacité combinée des armées européennes à se défendre, à dissuader des adversaires et à les combattre s'ils commettaient l'erreur de nous attaquer. Ce n'est pas le rôle de l'Union européenne en tant que telle. Cela étant, nous savons tous, en tout cas pour les membres de l'Union européenne, que l'Union européenne a un rôle essentiel à jouer en la matière, sur des domaines bien identifiés. Pour moi, l'Union européenne, en matière de défense, c'est au moins quatre apports potentiels d'importance diverses, mais c'est d'abord encourager la coopération entre des États membres qui, faute d'instruments européens, risquent de travailler tout seuls dans leur coin, alors que si on conjugue nos efforts, ce sera plus efficace. Le deuxième rôle de l'Union européenne, c'est de faciliter à l'échelle du continent l'augmentation de la production des industries de défense en facilitant, en allégeant les réglementations, en facilitant les investissements dans ce domaine. Troisième domaine, c'est la mobilité militaire, sujet qui est un sujet partagé d'ailleurs avec l'OTAN, mais c'est l'Union européenne qui a tous les instruments qui permettent de faciliter pour de vrai la mobilité militaire. Et puis le quatrième domaine, c'est de favoriser la convergence des besoins capacitaires des États européens. Et ça, c'est à l'échelle de l'Europe qu'il faut le faire. Et l'Union européenne et les agences comme l'AED ont un rôle majeur à jouer. Et puis le troisième domaine, c'est ce que Philippe indiquait. L'OTAN est essentielle, l'Union est précieuse, mais en fait, ce qui marche souvent pour aller vite, pour être efficace, ce sont les formats flexibles, divers, ad hoc, que l'on crée en fonction d'un besoin. Et on peut respecter pleinement le rôle de l'OTAN, on peut être convaincu du rôle de l'Union européenne et constater que quand il s'agit de réfléchir aux garanties de sécurité que les Européens pourront donner à l'Ukraine après un éventuel accord de paix, ou après un accord de paix quand il sera intervenu, eh bien une coalition of the willing, c'est plus efficace que toute autre institution, et pour des raisons que tout le monde connaît dans cette pièce, il se trouve que l'OTAN n'était pas en mesure de le faire. La coalition of the willing le fera. Lorsqu'il s'agit de réfléchir à des projets capacitaires, l'OTAN est utile, l'Union est utile, mais parfois c'est à 2 ou 3 partenaires qu'on peut converger sur un besoin, qu'on peut rassembler la force de nos industriels. C'est l'une des raisons, pour ne citer qu'un exemple, il y en a beaucoup d'autres, que la France a beaucoup poussé l'initiative ELSA dans le domaine de la capacité à avoir des frappes dans la profondeur, avec différents clusters, avec différents pays, et au cas par cas, en fonction des besoins, on travaille ensemble. Et je pense que cette logique doit être multipliée sur une base très pragmatique. Évidemment, il y a un risque, multiplier les formats dans tous les sens, mais c'est toujours mieux, de notre point de vue, que de garder des approches strictement nationales, non coordonnées entre puissances européennes. Aujourd'hui, si on regarde l'Europe en général, la bonne nouvelle, c'est que nous avons quasiment tous les États membres de l'UE, tous les alliés européens de l'OTAN, qui augmentent significativement leur budget de défense. Il y a un risque, c'est que cet argent soit dépensé dans une logique strictement nationale, et je me l'applique, nous l'appliquons à nous, France, évidemment. Il y a un risque, c'est que chacun, dans son coin, développe sa propre stratégie, développe ses propres équipements, et qu'on perde en efficacité collective en collaborant pas assez dans le domaine capacitaire, mais aussi dans le domaine opérationnel. Et donc tous les formats qui peuvent contribuer à cette coopération sont utiles. Voilà, j'ai été un peu long, désolé.
It works? It works. So thank you. It's going to be sort of a creeping death as we walk along here and all of our points get crossed out. Such is the nature. Maybe we'll see if we have some jokes and other things to keep the content. So of course, so much I agree with what Guillaume has said. I think the place for me to start is NATO's centrality in terms of European security. And I'd make an observation, which is that the Defense Department that I joined nearly 3 decades ago would talk about European security challenges and the knowledge, the truly held belief in the UK, and I think in many capitals, was that at a point of crisis, it was going to be necessary for national activity to fill the gap between the crisis and NATO action because of NATO indecision. And if you still think that is true, you have not been paying attention to what is going on in Brussels. The operational readiness mechanism that NATO has introduced, the delegations that have been handed to secure, and the sophistication with which NATO is now able to accelerate through contingencies is real and fundamentally changed. NATO is responding to the challenges of the security environment, and nations should no longer sit back saying, but of course it will be ages before NATO reacts. And we saw that. We saw that with the incursions in Poland. We saw that with the incursions in Estonia, where my predecessors would have expected it to be necessary for there to be national responses, and yet NATO acted. NATO acted rapidly, NATO acted effectively, and we provided a coordinated response. So it's really important that we shake off the kind of lazy assumption that NATO is the sleepy man in the corner of Europe. This is a new security paradigm, and we have a new NATO with real plans, real authorities able to defend Europe promptly and effectively. And it's our job, therefore, as nations, to lean in and to continue to reinforce those plans and to resource those plans. So the commitments that we made collectively in The Hague around resourcing SACEUR's plans, around raising Europe's game in terms of the delivery of European security ourselves is absolutely crucial. As Guillaume said, NATO is right at the heart of the defence of Europe. And from a UK perspective, we will absolutely deliver on the commitments that we have made as we evolve our force and we build capabilities. That is not to say that there is not a really clear place for European leadership in the security both of the continent and more broadly. I am incredibly proud of the work that the UK and France did together collaboratively around the Coalition of the Willing, and the way in which we drew together not just European allies, but others who absolutely understood that the security of Ukraine is fundamental not just to the security of Europe, but to global security and stability. It is clear to us that Ukraine must be supported, and we cannot set an example that Europe will simply compromise on its continental security, and the interests of Europe's security and the interests of Ukraine's security are connected without a doubt. And we see with the work that the UK is doing with Germany around the UK UDCG and Ukraine capabilities, again, a European willingness to take up its role. So when my Prime Minister talks about the role of Europe and the role of the US in Euro-Atlantic security, and he uses the words interdependence and overdependence, we absolutely mean it. it is absolutely fundamental to the security of this continent that we continue to have a Euro-Atlantic mindset. It's fundamental to us because of the strong relationship and the interdependencies that we have with the US, and it's fundamental to the US. Do not forget, we must not forget, that Europe is the eastern flank of the United States. NATO is absolutely about the security of Europe, but it is also absolutely about the security of the United States. And the work that we do in collaboration with our US colleagues, particularly around maritime security, particularly around underwater security, is absolutely key to all of our collective security on a Euro-Atlantic scale. So the temptation to think that the US can or will disconnect from Euro-Atlantic security misses the fact that we sit to their east. We are their flank, and we are a fundamental part of US security just as much as the US is a fundamental part of ours. It is a shared endeavor. So, what do we need to do? We need to consider how we, as European nations, absolutely step up and deliver the commitments that we've made in The Hague to contribute not to a European pillar of NATO, because that forgets the Euro-Atlantic dimension. This is the European contribution to Euro-Atlantic security. We need to absolutely work together as a European community to make sure that we are making the most of all of the opportunities that we have to work together. And for us in the UK, post-Brexit, finding the right path to the right degree of connection in terms of our defence industrial base and our collective endeavours is not straightforward, but it is absolutely necessary. Collectively, we are stronger. And then finally, we need to address the threat immediately on our border. Russia's brazen activity, not just in Ukraine, but its hybrid activity, its willingness to utilise cyber and other tools to destabilise and threaten the European continent is something that we have a fundamental duty and responsibility to address. So this is not just about Ukraine. There are threats that we are facing already today in terms of destabilising activity, and we must work together to address those.
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this panel. We represent here different regions of NATO, of the European Union, but what indeed brings us together is the same understanding, feeling of unity, the need to contribute to all the NATO and EU activities, and look for solutions satisfactory to all of us, to try to ensure or get not only our own country's interest, but to find solutions, as I said, that would make all the allies or EU members satisfied with NATO and the EU. There is no question that we in Europe should intensify our cooperation. The question is how we should be doing that. I would advocate for an incremental approach, simplifying a bit, of course, top-down approach. It's always easier to build a house from the basement than from the roof. So I think that we should indeed implement our commitments made so far within the NATO and the EU frameworks, and try to be doing, in simple words, what we've already declared, what we've already agreed. Then to think about adjusting the structures, improving mechanisms of our cooperation within NATO or the EU. What should we be doing in NATO? As it's been already said, We should deliver definitely much more capabilities. We should be more effective. The Hague commitments were already mentioned a year ago at the Hague summit. We need indeed to spend more, especially when it comes to that 3.5 part of the commitments, resources to be spent on essential military commitments. That in practice means something that is called the NATO capability targets. All the NATO allies made specific declarations to ensure that NATO will have the sufficient pool of forces and capabilities to meet its commitments, to be able to deter and defend all of us. And we should really find resources for that. We should continue with the NATO defense or military adaptation to make our forces more ready, to improve our C2 arrangements, to prepare the plans for the defense of all the regions, and so on and so forth. The more NATO allies are capable, the more NATO allies are contributing to the NATO, within the NATO framework. The better, the safer we are. Two litmus tests, I would say, for NATO, especially from a Polish perspective: Russia and Ukraine, or in the opposite order, Ukraine. We are passing this test as allies, as EU members. Ukraine can count on our support. As you know, Poland stepped up quickly, immediately. We emptied our, even not stocks, but our units, active units. Then the rest followed. As I'm saying, we are passing this test, and you should continue with or on that road. Russia. I will be blunt now. We are very much satisfied with the change that happened in approach, attitude of our Western allies toward Russia. But that should be a permanent change. We very much believe that it will be a permanent change, that with the first signal that something is changing in Moscow, that there won't be a will to adjust it, to hope that Russia is becoming a partner. I'm sorry to say it, but for the time being, we have to build or improve, perhaps, security architecture against Russia. We would like to see at some point Russia that is cooperative, and we believe in it. Cognitive warfare, cognitive approach is something that is close to our hearts. We don't want to. I'm not advocating for provoking Russia, but our thinking should be based on the assumption that we have to be protect ourselves from Russia. A word on I'm thinking if I said everything when it comes to NATO, I hope so. A word about the EU. Poland is now very much satisfied with the ongoing developments within the EU. It is, if you look at our position, attitude to the EU over several, or even more than 10 years, we are on the peak, if I may put it that way, with the EU that is really ready to assist its members with meeting their commitments made in NATO, with meeting what I mentioned a while ago, the NATO capability targets. We are, as you know, as a Poland, the most active beneficiary of the SAFE mechanism. We do like what the EU is doing in this respect, and we also think that the EU is playing or could play even more prominent role in assisting its members in building resilience vis-à-vis Russia in the areas that NATO is not competent, that NATO doesn't feel competent. Thank you very much.
Okay. I understand I can speak Italian. No. And, so I'm sorry, so you have to bear my bad English, and thank you very much. Bonjour tout le monde, and thank you for having me here. It's truly a privilege, I feel thrilled. And thank you, Philip, for having set the setting the scenario and the scene, and for your question, which was, I would say, the question that has been discussed among us for the last 2 years, and I think we cannot be tranchant in an answer from this point of view. But if I may say, if we put the European, let's say, autonomy, European pillar as a benchmark, I see a pathway through that, through 3 stepping stones, okay? We have to do all of them if you want to reach that benchmark. And these stepping stones, okay, you have to do them, and you have to also be careful not to fall in the water. First stepping stone is, let's say, the material one, industry. We just mentioned it a bit, but I want a little bit go toward that. What is the task of the defense industry? It's to build, deliver platform, okay? What's a platform? Everything, any capacity, kinetic, not kinetic, physical, not physical, that make us relevant in all the 5 domains. Relevant in domain where it's a confrontation ground where other peer competitor are very assertive, sometimes much more assertive than us, and sometimes more capable in produce platform. So we need a lot of platform. Industry has to do that, but then doing a lot, defense of industry is doing a lot, but is not doing that at the pace that we need them. And they make us, I don't want to say weaker, but weaker than we should be. Why is happening that? Fragmentation, definitely. 16 different tanks in Europe, okay? US, China, Russia, they got 3 different kind of tanks. 9 different kind of frigates, corvettes, against 3/4 kind of frigates. That creates a lack of interoperability. That creates a lack of capability to integrate, and it's a weakness. So we have to go toward that. So, you know, Italy is very much on harmonization, standardization of the requirement at the beginning of the process. That should be at political level. And then you let the industry have a fair, let's say fair, competition to deliver the best platform to be relevant in the domain. And it's not enough, because even if you've got a lot of platform, we need to keep the pace in case a situation of attrition comes. And then we go to another area, which is the supply chain one. Are you strong enough for that? I don't think so. I got some figures here for you. Talking about fighter, okay, modern, like, I don't know, Rafale, say, 400 kilos of raw material. You need 400 kilos of raw material to make a Rafale. It's a Rafale, but it's a 5th generation or 4th generation fighter. 19% of those 400 kilos are extracted in China. Even if you have them in Europe, 70/80% should be anyway sent somewhere else to process that, because we don't have the capability to process that. It means that even if you got a lot of platform, we will not have at the moment the capability to stand a long attrition warfare. And that creates lack of deterrence. So you have to be deterrent, to express deterrence, you have to express deterrence through all the chain, not just the first 15 days of fight. And then, okay, you spoke about the financial tools. Good, we got the financial tools. But again, if you talk about 250 billion of the next MFF, hopefully, to, let's say, EDIP, okay, to support the non-recurrent cost of our industry, every year, the 3 countries I mentioned before, they normally spend every year 100 billion already, every year, not on 7 years. So again, it doesn't match. Okay, so it's good, and I'm not saying that it's not good, but you have to do more. Moving to the next stepping stone. Okay, we've got a lot of platform now. Okay, you got the supply chain strong. Who is going to use that? You talk about European Union. okay? So when we think about European pillar, normally we associate that to the European Union defense or army, let's say. I would enlarge a little bit this concept. We think that we should have a continental European organization, which include not just European. So the European pillar is based on clearly on the 27, plus UK, plus Norway, plus Turkey, plus the Balkans, plus Ukraine. That is the continental pillar we think about. And all of that should be harmonized and integrated through a body that help this integration, maybe with a platform that are already interpoled by design. Okay, we got a lot of platform. We got a very good organized European defense. I think we go to the next stepping stone, which is probably the most complicated one, the culture of defense, public opinion, and the idea that still now all we spend in defense, I'm not talking about maybe it's different sensibility in different countries, I'm sure about that. But still, there is a lot of people that think that all the money we spend on defense is wasted or should be used for other fields that are clearly equally important. But without defense, without deterrence, we don't have education, we don't have health. Look at Ukraine. And then when the crisis or the war happened, we cannot just look at where is my defense when you have forgot about that for 20 years as we did. Because war is like love. It just happens. And when you are there, if you don't have your armies to protect you, it could be difficult to carry on. So maybe, sorry if it took a longer time, but it's more or less what we see in terms of way to this hopeful benchmark we are looking for. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I love the fact that we have 5 DPDs and the word love has come into the conversation, and it's a feeling that we share. Thank you very much to be on a scene with great friends, to be on a scene where you have the flags of NATO, the EU, the tricolor, and the Danish flag, Dannebrog. We feel very welcome here in Paris. Thank you for your solidarity. It's great to be here. So that's that. Let me just thank you very much. And then a few things. We just had an election in Denmark, so there's a limit to how much policy I can venture into, and therefore I feel tempted after all these good speaking points to just say I agree with everything, and then that's the end of it. But I think I'm not. That's probably not why someone paid my plane tickets. I'll just try to say a little bit more. I think one of the things that we need to do to take this step as Europe is we need to agree on the threat analysis. We need to understand what the threat is, and we need to agree that this is actually what we're facing. Now, the Danish Defense Intelligence Service have put out a threat analysis last year, which was very clear that when the war stops in Ukraine, hopefully by Ukraine winning, but when the war stops, then the Russian war machine will continue. It will continue to produce, it will have its own internal logic. So we will be in a situation where we may face a regional war in the Baltic Sea within 2 years and a greater war in Europe within 5 years under 2 conditions: that the US decides to stay out of this, and if we do not arm ourselves at the same pace. So that is what we're looking into. That is what we have to prepare ourselves for. 2 years, ladies and gentlemen. That's a very short time span for anything, especially maybe in defense. So there's a real urgency here, and we need to take the political decisions to address that urgency. What does that mean? Well, my wonderful shot spoke about the ability to fight tonight. And the ability to fight tonight basically rests on a high level of pragmatism. A great friend of mine said to me yesterday evening, everything simple is false, everything complicated is useless. And I think that's wise words, and it speaks into this pragmatism that we cannot allow ourselves to say European autonomy is Europe alone. we are in a situation where we are strongly dependent on our international partners for training, for exercise, for weapons acquisition, for the systems that we already have. So that pragmatism has to be in everything we do. And that means that the fact that we're spending a lot of money, I think Denmark this year will spend 3.4% of GDP on defense. So we are way ahead of the curve. But spending money in itself is not a success. It's not. It's only when you have the effect on the ground that you're actually making a difference. And in the threat analysis, spending money means nothing. It means nothing for the threat we're faced by Russia. It's only when we have real deterrence on the ground that we are making an effect. And that means that we cannot allow ourselves to say we will only buy certain systems. We will only buy the, perfect becomes the enemy of good. And I think that's a little bit how maybe we used to do it in the old days. We didn't have that much money. So we were very careful with our money. When we were spending our money, it took us forever to spend the money. Then we would only buy the perfect systems, because when you spend the money, you want something really nice. You went to the weapon or to the defense industry, and they say, perfect, we can make this for you. We'll have it ready for you in 8 or 10 years. And it's just not where we are. We need to be able to fight tonight and at least within 2 years. So pragmatism. The other thing I just want to point is that European autonomy, we are great proponent of European autonomy, and I think it's Europe has taken some very decisive steps in the last year. Defense Readiness 2030, the 9 capability coalitions, with a lot of work is being put into this. But it also demands a certain level of mind change for us. So if we are to have real European autonomy, we have to think as Europeans. Now, in Denmark, we don't have a very big defense industry, so I can say this. It's more for you guys to, but so I can make this argument. But if we are to think as Europeans, we have to prioritize European thinking and maybe think a little less about what's good for our own national industry. Because then we get stuck in a situation where we're not taking this demand for urgency seriously. I think we can learn a lot from what happens in Ukraine. Basically, and the question mark is, are we learning enough? Are we really taking the learning lessons and putting it into our doctrine, putting it into how we operate? We try it, we say we will do it, but are we actually doing it? And I think one of the lessons we've learned is, if we are to, we gave everything we had to Ukraine, all our entire artillery, half of our F-16s, we have nothing left on the shelves. Next step we decided to do was to build the Danish model, where us and a number of allies are putting money directly into Ukrainian defense industry. And what that means is that you get bang for the buck, cheaper and faster than anything else you could. And that's what we can talk about urgency, but the urgency in Ukraine is off the charts, right? So they need to have this stuff straight away. And again, if Europe is dependent on what Ukraine does, we cannot spend too much time looking at our own industry. We have to give them that effect straight away. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I will use my position to ask, let's say, a shorter follow-up question. I think we discussed a lot about readiness. Are we ready? But, I mean, all of you work in your own Ministry of Defense, and we are never ready. Were the Ukrainians ready for a Russian attack? Clearly not. Were the Russians ready for their own attack on Ukraine? They were not. So by the end, it's a lot about readiness, but it's also a lot about willingness to use what you have. Of course, the military tools, but also the whole nation supporting the effort. And something that we've learned from the Ukrainians is that I think the Ukrainians were lucky that they did not trust their state too much before the start of the war. They took in their own hand to defend the state. So I wanted to ask you, and I know Paolo told me it's a bit too academic-ish question, what you could say about this willingness to use everything that we are now building in Europe. and I will start in reverse order. Just fun fact, I think Denmark is the only country in the whole history of Europe that France never attacked.
And we hear that quite a lot from our French friends, but what they forget to say afterwards is that it actually cost us our fleet, because then the British came and took our fleet. So thank you very much for that. But yes, yeah, we never, and I don't think that will happen in any future. So that's wonderful. We were fighting wars with Sweden for 350 years. Now we are family, so it can happen. You know, there's a message of hope here. I think our politicians is much more willing to act. I think we all waking up from a nightmare, realizing that we are still in a nightmare. So there's nowhere to hide here anymore. But just returning to my own point, the time from taking a political decision to having effect on the ground, that is the time span that we need to minimize. I don't think there's a lack of political willingness to do anything, but that time span is just, and there are plenty of things you can do. We can buy things together, we can train together, we can, systems that we are acquiring, we can ask great friends here to teach us how to use the system before we get the system, so we are ready when we get them. There are many, many things we can do, and I think when I look across European partners, this web of cooperation is becoming tighter and tighter. We're constantly making new MOUs and new political agreements, and of course that in itself doesn't mean anything, but it does have an effect in how we operate, how we train. In the Nordic region, the fact that Sweden and Finland has joined NATO is a complete change in how we operate. So suddenly we have a very, very strong capability in the north, 250 fighter planes, so on and so forth, and there's so many things we can do. So it's not a political willingness, I think. It is how we get all these things done at the same time. And that is a real bottleneck difficulty.
Yeah, Philippe, you said a very, very true thing. So fully readiness is an unreachable objective. You never have it, and but you can try to be ready. And I think my answer now, my point is much more connected to what I said before. So public opinion help a lot. But if you see readiness like an engine, okay, the political will actually is the fuel for that engine. So you can slow down or speed up the readiness according to the quantity and quality of the fuel you put in. I think now there is a lot of fuel on it, and so we are going towards that direction. We got readiness 2030, so this readiness, we set also a timeline, but we have to see which credible level of readiness we will reach in 2030. But anyway, we have an objective, a time, a deadline, and the right word there. There is another point, I think. There is another, talking about political will and political stance in Europe. We have also, I don't want to say fighting another battle, but there is another thing that we are very strong, but we are struggling at the moment, and which is let's say, the multilateralism and liberalism versus realism that is very much at stake at the moment. I think our strength, the European Union and Europe's strength, is that we keep on strongly believe in multilateralism, in doing things together, in liberalism, and in believing in the strength of staying together. That this particular historical time seems a little bit at stake. I think that if we keep on doing that, maybe we will struggle, but at the end of the day, we will succeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I too agree that you, in your question, touched upon the core issue. I mean, political willingness. And I think that there is yes, that's the main challenge, to generate political will, courage, sometimes foresight, to not only to spend, as you, Tobias, said, not only to spend more on defense, but to shape our defense in the best possible manner. And it is a challenge. When it comes to Russia, I know that I'm saying something now that is obvious, that is evident. But Russia is really ready and willing to get as far as we will allow it to go. We are in a, I mean, as a NATO, as European members, we are in a, I would say, a very specific situation because on the one hand, we know that we are stronger in a way than Russia if we combine our capabilities, that we are able to generate more defense, more militaries than Russia. But on the other hand, and that's why it gave us some space to wait, not to be in a hurry. But Russia is really determined, and is. I don't want to state the obvious. We know that developments from 2009 till or through 2014 in Ukraine. I meant Georgia in 2008, Ukraine for the first time 2014, and then the war that started 4 years ago, 2022. That shows, that demonstrates that Russia is not only willing but able to use force, war to reach its objectives, and we have to be ready for that. If somebody puts a knife on my neck and asks the following question: what is the most important thing when it comes to defense, collective defense, NATO? And I would try to say, no, there are many things, but he would press the knife, no, say, what is the most important thing for Poland? And I would say the executability of NATO's defense plans. NATO has developed plans to defend its flank, allies, plans that define numbers of forces, capabilities, C2 arrangements, and so on and so forth. And they are not, I would say, and it should be, as I said, executable. And they are not filled in to the extent we think it is necessary. We should be working on that. That means those plans are not entirely executable for many reasons. To some extent, because we, as allies, don't have sufficient forces at the moment. But sometimes, honestly, some allies are hesitant to declare those forces to the defense of particular regions. And yeah, but it is not only in the interest of Poland and other countries that are, I would say, exposed directly to the threat, but to all of us. And very briefly, if I may return to the previous question, because I didn't mention the US in this context of building, becoming stronger and stronger as Europeans. We should not. Our thinking shouldn't be based on the assumption that the decisions in the US to leave Europe have already been taken, and it has to happen. It is, I think, a more complex story. It is in our interest. On the one hand, it is in our interest to keep the US involved in the security and defense on Europe for obvious reasons. But at the same time, as I said, we should be ready to generate more capabilities, as the US is saying clearly that some of those capabilities won't be available to NATO to the extent as it is now. We should be ready to develop those capabilities. The most prominent examples, of course, is DPS, deep precision strike, and integrated air and missile defense. This is something that we always missed, lacked, and regardless of the future of transatlantic relations, the US specific position on Europe, we should be able to generate more. Thank you very much.
So you're right, we're never ready. Of course, also we're always ready. So defense departments love to have tables and charts and complex definitions of what is readiness with numbers and measurements. And I don't think ever in my career all the flags on the side of those charts are going to be green. And yet, when we need to generate capability to address immediate issues again and again and again, we're able to demonstrate nationally and together that we can generate capability and that we can contribute. And I think sometimes we're dogged a little bit by a peacetime mindset. I remember talking to a colleague a while ago about how hard work it is chasing Russian submarines around the Atlantic. And it's really hard work because submarines are hard to find. Of course, the answer that I wanted was not how hard is it to chase submarines around the Atlantic. It's within the first 24 hours of contact, can you get a constructive kill? Because in wartime, I'm not following a Russian submarine around the Atlantic. I am killing it. And we need to be clear that the way in which we think sometimes about the generation of capability is educated by our experience today, rather than what we ask of ourselves at the most serious moments. And for me, readiness is not just about the capacity of the force, it's about the ability in the national interest and in the interest of European security for us to deliver those outcomes rapidly and effectively. And I think it's really important that we stay focused on that. The second thing I would say is we have the wrong equipment. And I am continually impressed by the ability of our armed forces to do amazing things with the wrong equipment. So I'll give you just a little example. In Afghanistan, we bought the United Kingdom Armed Forces an armoured bus, the mastiff vehicle for them to drive backwards and forwards. And it had a self-defense weapon on it. And within the first few days of that vehicle being fielded, with troops in contact, the Royal Armoured Corps officers operating that vehicle sat there and they looked at the vehicle and they looked at their friends in a firefight and they thought, well, this is an armoured vehicle with a gun on it and I know how to fight a tank. So what did they do? They utilised that vehicle as a mobile fires platform. They shielded the troops in contact. They delivered supporting fires, and that engagement was far more successful as a result. And our militaries do that again and again and again. So we can fixate on the tables and we can fixate on the equipment not being quite perfect. But across Europe, we have a lot of fighting equipment. We have excellent armed forces. And I have confidence that they will, as we need them, deliver high-quality combat outcomes. None of that is an excuse for us as policymakers to continue to give them the wrong equipment. So our job is to continue to rise to the challenge of resourcing the plans and delivering the right capabilities and building our capacity. But we should not confuse that challenge that we have with an inability to fight for the defense of this continent. We can do that, and I believe in our armed forces today.
Je suis d'accord avec tout ce qui a été dit. En fait, la question n'est pas de savoir si on est prêt ou pas, parce que soit on peut considérer qu'on l'est déjà et qu'on le sera toujours, soit qu'on ne le sera jamais. La vraie question, c'est comment nos adversaires potentiels nous perçoivent. Et notre problème, soyons honnêtes, à nous, Européens, c'est qu'à tort ou à raison, nos principaux potentiels adversaires nous perçoivent comme faibles. Et malheureusement, l'honnêteté impose de dire que les évolutions tendancielles de la relation transatlantique et certains de ces soubresauts peuvent contribuer à cette impression. Si on apparaît faible, je ne pense pas que ce soit une question fondamentalement de nombre de tanks, de nombre d'avions de combat, de nombre de divisions. Évidemment, nous avons besoin de davantage d'équipements et d'équipements mieux adaptés aux conflits futurs. Et on est en train de le faire, et je ne peux qu'être d'accord avec Paolo, Tobias notamment, sur le fait qu'il faut le faire. Il faut avoir l'argent, il faut convertir l'argent en équipement, et il faut mettre ces équipements dans des unités militaires prêtes à la guerre. Il faut le faire. Mais ce n'est pas la raison principale pour laquelle on peut apparaître faible. La vraie raison, c'est que nos adversaires ne pensent pas que nous sommes moralement, intellectuellement, politiquement prêts à la confrontation. Ils ne pensent pas ça parce que d'abord, les Européens, nos adversaires, misent sur notre désunion, sur le manque d'unité. Et c'est pour ça que pour nous, au sein de l'OTAN, au sein de l'Union européenne, préserver l'unité, la consolider est absolument fondamental. Nous faisons le jeu de nos adversaires lorsque nous ne sommes pas unis. Ensuite, nos adversaires misent sur notre manque d'unité nationale dans chacun de nos pays. Et c'est pour ça que nous sommes tous, sans exception, sous le feu d'attaques hybrides, informationnelles, immixtion dans nos processus électoraux, attaques cyber, survol de drones non identifiés. C'est un test permanent de la cohésion nationale et de l'unité nationale. Donc nous devons faire la démonstration que nous sommes plus forts que cela. Et puis enfin, la vraie question, c'est le jour où la question se pose, sachant que si elle se pose, nous aurons déjà échoué, parce que la dissuasion, c'est éviter que la question se pose, mais le jour où la question se pose, jusqu'à quel point les Européens, pas leurs armées, mais leurs dirigeants et les opinions publiques, les nations, seront véritablement prêtes à aller à la confrontation. Et c'est une question absolument majeure. C'est la raison pour laquelle, dans la stratégie nationale de sécurité française de l'été dernier, c'est un élément essentiel. S'il devait y avoir un jour une guerre en Europe, ça n'est pas qu'un problème pour les forces armées qui seront prêtes. C'est un problème pour toute la nation. Est-elle prête aux sacrifices divers et variés qu'imposerait une telle situation? C'est une question aussi là encore, d'unité. C'est au cœur de notre stratégie nationale de sécurité. C'est la raison pour laquelle en France, à chaque fois que nécessaire, les autorités françaises ont publiquement suscité le débat sur les enjeux de sécurité du continent européen. Lorsque nous avons décidé de donner à l'Ukraine des garanties, une forme de garantie de sécurité, lorsque nous avons avancé avec le Royaume-Uni et tous nos partenaires sur la coalition des volontaires, le président de la République a décidé de susciter un débat au Parlement qui n'était pas imposé par la Constitution pour que les citoyens français soient conscients de ce que nous faisions, pourquoi nous le faisions et ce que cela pouvait impliquer le jour venu. C'est par cet effort-là, qui est en plus de l'effort d'équipement et de renforcement de nos armées, c'est par l'envoi de ce message que nous sommes déterminés, qu'il y a des choses que nous ne sommes pas prêts à accepter en Europe comme Européens. C'est en montrant que nous sommes résilients face aux attaques hybrides et, le cas échéant, prêts à y répondre, que nous envoyons le message que nous avons non seulement les soldats équipés et entraînés, si possible bien équipés, nous avons les équipements militaires, nous avons l'industrie de défense qui nous permettra de durer. C'est pour ça qu'il est si important de développer l'industrie de défense européenne, mais qu'aussi nous avons la volonté politique et que nous avons la cohésion nationale et européenne qui nous permettrait de soutenir un effort militaire si nous étions agressés.
Okay, someone backstage showed me a paper saying you need to stop now. If there is a bit frustration, I think a good debate is one with a bit frustration at the end. It means not everything has been discussed. I have to thank you, all of you, for this very interesting inputs and the public, and see you around for the rest of the day. Thanks to all of you.